Okay, so I just want to review a couple of the testable questions that we looked at and review the design of the experiment. What I wanted you guys to do or get out of this was to look at a testable question and understand how you could test it, okay? So this one, does giving estrogen to cows increase their milk production? And one of the things that a lot of students did was when they first encountered the word estrogen, they thought, I have no idea what that means. And you're probably going to encounter those kinds of words on tests where you're not quite sure what it means. But you can look and see some clues in the sentence to help you understand what it means, okay? So it says, does giving estrogen to cows increase their milk production? So what you can assume is that estrogen has something to do with milk production in cows, okay? Estrogen is a hormone. It's a female hormone that gives sexual characteristics to females. And one of those characteristics is breast development, as well as in animals. It would result from a mature female that could give birth to offspring and then produce milk to feed their offspring. Cows don't produce milk for us. They actually produce milk for their offspring. But we sort of exploit that and produce our milk for us as well as a source of food. Okay, so what I wanted you guys to get out of this is how to set it up, okay? So let's just put this here and we'll talk about how we're going to set up the experimental design. So you need a control group, okay? And you remember I told you that you don't have to draw a pretty picture. So here's a cow, okay? And I'll actually make it sort of looks like a cow. And here's another cow. And to test this, I would probably take 2 cows or 200 cows, it doesn't really matter, and give one group no estrogen, just have them producing milk the way they normally would. And then another group I would actually give estrogen to, okay? And so then I would look at how much milk they produced, and you can just measure the milk production by volume, okay? So let's take a look at the variables that you would consider, okay? And one of the things that you could do is actually use the same cow, test it in its natural condition, which is just the way it normally produces milk. And then after you measure how much milk they produce, you could give them estrogen and see if that changes their production. One of the things that you have to remember is that we have to control our variables. So if we want to do this, let's say we use 2 separate cows, you have to make sure that they're both the same breed of cow, that they're at the same age, that they've both had the same number of offspring, because that might change the results. So you have to make sure you're controlling your variables. You have to make sure that they're given the same amount of food, that they're given the same amount of water, they're provided with the same conditions, the sleeping conditions, and all of that, and the time on the milking machine. In this case, you would probably use a milking machine, because that's the only way you would be able to measure how much milk is produced. Okay, so those are all the variables that we would consider, okay? So those are the variables that we would control. We would control all of those variables, like the type of cow, how much they eat, that type of thing, okay? So those are the variables that we control, okay? Now we have to look at the independent variable, and don't forget, all of the variables are exactly the same except for one, and the one thing that we change is the independent variable. And don't forget, I remember I said, put up your finger, the one thing you change is the independent variable, okay? So that's a good thing to remember. One is the independent variable. The one thing you change is the independent variable. And what did we change here? In this case, we changed feeding the cow estrogen, okay? So you would give a dose of estrogen to the cow and then measure their milk production. And then what you would do is you would compare it to the cow that did not receive the estrogen. So this cow that does not receive the changed or independent variable, this one is called the control group. And even though it's one cow, we still call it the control group. Now, the cow that received the estrogen is considered the test group or experimental group. You can use those words interchangeably, okay? Okay, so now we want to know, we've got the independent variable, the control group, the test group. We've talked about all the variables that we controlled. Now, the one thing that we didn't talk about is the dependent variable, okay? And the dependent variable is the thing that you measure. It's the data that you collect. And this is a good way to remember it. The dependent variable is the data that you collect. Well, what data are we collecting? Well, we're collecting the milk. So we're measuring the milk. What you measure after you do the experiment is your dependent variable. So the dependent variable is the milk. And I'll say the milk volume. Okay, so that should give you a good idea how to set up or design an experiment and include all of those things.